hi, Bob. I'm really delighted that we've been able to carve out this time to be together. When we've been thinking about preparing for summer 2021, and of course, that preparation started, I think, in around May 2020. Um, I knew, obviously knowing my background, I knew that there was going to be a psychological component more than ever before to preparing obviously children, but also whole families, for the camp experience. Um, of course, when I had those thoughts, I didn't think that I would navigate that alone. I knew that you would be the perfect partner to help me, move through the various stages towards camp with our camp families. So I'd just love to introduce you, Bob, because we've known each other a long time. In fact, your relationship with IHC started with Dave and Shelley many years ago. And Joel worked with you, when he was a young staff member. So you
That's
really
right. Yeah.
you understand the history of IHC, what we are all about, because I think the true fiber of who we are has remained the same, even though a lot has changed. Um, you also are a child and adolescent therapist with a very successful practice in Boston. And you have a really great appreciation and understanding of camp. And that is unique. There's not a lot of successful clinicians who also have the experience with camp. And as you know, like that, those two pieces, are so interrelated in so many ways, but an expertise that a lot of people don't have. So I would love for you to share with our new families. A lot of families will know who you are, but, just in your own words, a little bit about yourself and your obviously connection to us.
Well, first of all, thanks, Lauren, for inviting me. And I'm a big IHC fan. As you said, I started coming to IHC back in the 90s when Dave and Shelley Tager were running it. And I was just so impressed with the care that they took with individual campers. I mean, you had that sort of, all camps say they have this family feel, but I've been to a lot of camps in the United States, like over 600. And when I came to IHC, and I remember the first time Maddie said to me as I walked in, he said, "Welcome home." I almost teared up because it's like, yeah, I kind of feel like that. This is like my second home. And what I think is so great is the way that you and Joel have, continued that tradition, and you just make kids feel like they belong there. And so I've got just a deep appreciation, not only for what camp does, but in particular what you and Joel do at IHC.
Well, thank you for that. And look, we always say that I think part of what makes this experience so authentic at the moment is that we are in the thick of it, right? With our families, that we have four young children, and we're living the experience, right? And that's one of the most amazing things about our role at camp, and particularly my role as a woman, is that I am connected to all these other moms, whether they're at home with their kids or they're juggling, a job as well as motherhood. Some people are caring for their parents and everything in between. I'm in the thick of it with them, right? And there's just this shared experience that has been extremely helpful to Joel and I as we've been navigating our tenure, as the owners directors of IHC. And as you know, it hasn't always been easy. And that's where you have been able to support us and provide us a lot of guidance, over the years, like not just in terms of our leadership, but in terms of how we also support our community. And I do want to, share with our families, particularly our new families, that you are somebody that has always consulted with me. Like if I'm having a situation on any given summer, you would be a consultant to us who I can phone. We can talk obviously confidentially about a situation that I'm being faced with and have been a really good resource. So I don't think a lot of people know that. Like I think people know that I have a psychology background, but they might not know that we always have partnered with you as a consultant to support me in things that, maybe need a little bit more discussion, or have been, a resource for our parents, if they also, wanted to connect with somebody, outside of kind of the leadership of camp. So,
Right.
so thanks for that. So tell us a little bit though about your experience as a camp staff member, because you're not just coming at this at 30,000 feet, like seeing camps running and seeing how you can help leadership. Like, you actually have been a staff member. So, could you share a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. So first of all, I never went to camp as a kid because in that time and space that I grew up, I just didn't know about camp. I think it was sort of a great, wonderful secret that I didn't know about. And when I was in college at the age of 19, I went off to camp for the first time as a camp counselor. And I think, some of the people who were directors there might joke about, was I a camper or was I a counselor? Because I think I had as much fun as the kids did. But what I was impressed with, I was a psychology major at the time. What I was impressed with was the impact that it made on these kids. And I had never seen that before. And I went back a couple of years, got my degree, kind of took some time between going back to graduate school and went off to Cape Cod, where I became a counselor at a boys sailing camp, and then eventually the assistant director. So just like you and Joel, live what your parents are living. And so if a parent calls you, from experience what they're really going through. I really know what happens like in cabins and, in activities and on those walks you take with kids from the dining hall back to the cabin that are so important. So I have that sort of in the trenches kind of experience. And so I know what it is. I know what the impact is. In fact, I remember once going to McLean Hospital here in Boston, and they have a Friday lunch series, speaker series for all of their psych residents. There are 200 people who come in, and I talked about camp, and it was as if I was speaking a different language. It was like, wait, what is this? Like, how do we find out more about this? We need to send our kids to this kind of place. I think people, and I don't mean to kind of jump to this too quickly, but I think people underestimate and undervalue the power of the kind of enrichment that camp gives to kids. Frankly, Lauren, I think we're going to need that this summer more than ever.
Yeah, no, and I would love to kind of, discuss that a little bit more. Maybe we could start. I mean, you have a very vibrant practice in Boston.
Yes.
Maybe you could share with us like who is part of your practice and what you're seeing, within the kids and adolescents who come to your practice. And maybe I just preface that by saying to our families, I am talking with many of you on a daily basis. And I know that many of you are making it work and your kids are doing okay. But I also know that many of you are looking for additional support networks for your children, or maybe have them speaking to a therapist. And that is so common in this moment. I think it's a very busy time for, psychological services. And I am a huge advocate for psychological services. I think that it's something that, like a pediatrician, we should have that, available to our kids and tap into, when we need it. And of course, the reason that I'm putting this webinar together with you, Bob, is because I want to provide that resource for parents that maybe say, I don't think I need to go to the therapist. Like, I don't think I need my kid to be in there. Or maybe there's just logistical challenges of getting your child there, considering we're all just trying to make our lives work right now. So this is a resource for parents if they need it, and a resource through you sharing your experience and expertise. So with that said, tell us a little bit about, your practice and what you're seeing right now.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, the families, whose children I see I think, mirror very closely the families that IHC serves. These are families where they value education. They really put a lot of energy and effort into their kids. They care deeply about their kids. They see psychological services as a resource as opposed to a stigma. And I think they really want that. They're very tuned in to their kids, as busy as they are, as much as they are, part of the professional class usually, or they're small business owners, or they're part of, they're sort of major players in businesses across the country, and they're very busy. They also take the time to really pay attention to and nurture their relationships with their kids. I also think there are families that tend to send their kids to camps like IHC, right? They see the value of that summer enrichment. So I would say again that the kids that I see are probably very similar to kids who go to IHC. And what I'm seeing, it's kind of like you alluded to, Lauren. I think the impact of the pandemic we know is not equal. There are some kids who have suffered some great loss. They've had grandparents who've died. They've had grandparents who've had close calls, who've had been very sick. Or they've had an uncle or their father or mother had a college roommate who got sick and died. And then there are others who didn't have that kind of loss, but have been cooped up in the house with their parents for more than a year. By the way, ironically, this is the week that the World Health Organization declared the coronavirus a pandemic. And this is when we all were like, oh, like this is serious, right? And here we are a year later. And I think, so that the impact of the pandemic may be very different. Some families did well and, their businesses thrived, and other families, there were parents who lost their jobs or were put on furlough. So I think the impact is very different. But what I would say is everybody has had some kind of loss, right?
Right.
Everybody has. Right. I mean, kids, one of the things I think the pandemic has shown us is the limits of social media and talking to a screen. While it's better than nothing, I think what we've realized is that, and kids knew it all along. I think they just didn't tell us. There are real limits to what connecting on social media does for kids. And I think, what we've learned, if anything, is that, and I see this, the kids that I see talk about this all the time. We listen with more than just our ears, and we talk with more than just our mouths. There's something about presence that kids miss. And I think they miss their friends. I think they miss school. We know that school, is 80% social. We don't like to think about it that way, but it is. So kids are learning much more all the time than just academics. And I think we have to think about the whole child. Yeah. I hear kids who say, it's boring, every day is the same. I lose my attention when I'm watching on screen for school. I get so tired. I'm cranky. I can't be with my friends. And it's not just whining. I think there's some real loss there.
Yeah.
And by the way, the other thing that we've seen, Lauren, is that kids who have an underlying, vulnerability. For example, if they have attention deficit disorder, or if they have anxiety, if they have depression, or if they have some touches, they're dusted with a little Asperger's, right? And they normally do well, right? Because they have resources in school, they have friends, they can play outside, they have clubs. All of that's gone. And so what we're seeing is that kids with underlying vulnerabilities who normally cope really well have really struggled during the pandemic. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a little, snapshot.
That's helpful. And I think parents like myself, we know that too much electronics is not good for our kids. And we've accepted that it's part of the life that we, or the time period that we're raising our kids in. And I joked with my own girlfriends at the beginning of this pandemic, when we kind of migrated up to camp in March, that my kid's schedule was pretty much, revolving around the battery life of an iPad, right? And here I am as a massive advocate for no electronics, being outside, family time, connectivity. But there were just realities of the moment that we were in that I needed that to help our family function, right? I definitely, I'm somebody that's about moderation, but let's just talk quickly about and I want to separate it into the kind of younger age group that are not quite on social media, and then the older age group that are. And I know that I don't want people to think that I'm using this webinar as a let's bash all electronics. I'm not, but I do want to just put into context for parents the things that we have to think about. That essentially camp becomes the therapeutic antidote for that, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about time on electronics and its impact on emotional regulation. And I have two children out of my four that, we call the iPad the crack pad because they're addicted.
Yeah.
And then after that, they are a different child. And I obviously, know that it's because of what it's doing to their brain. But let's talk a little bit about, emotional regulation or dysregulation that comes from too much electronics, and how a space like camp is really, the nemesis of that, right? It's where kids really thrive.
Yeah, so there's two ways to talk about it. One is, what is the actual impact of all of that electronics on a child's development, and as you say, emotional regulation, self-regulation. But the other is what it replaces. In other words, the loss of socialization, because it's where kids learn frustration tolerance and impulse control and how to share. All of those things come from delaying gratification, self-regulation. All of that comes from socializing, right? It doesn't come from electronics. What electronics do is they hit the reward system. The people who design the games and design all of the features in these games know how to keep kids coming back, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there are these little rewards. It's always striking the dopamine system, which is the reward system in the brain, which is what makes you say, I can see how my kids get addicted to it.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that it also exhausts the brain in a certain way. So you see kids after they're off of their electronics being irritable, being cranky, having that kind of reentry, problem. And by the way, I think most parents, are like you. They've made this kind of concession to their kids because it's just the time we're in. I mean, it's what do you do when your kids are home and cooped up? So I think parents are uneasy about it and have made this sort of uneasy concession. And I think they also know, and I think this is part of what you're getting at, is there's going to come a time, especially if they go off to camp, where they have to pull themselves away from that, and they have to get out of that that routine, which has been highly reinforced by the reward system in the games themselves. Right. So not only is there a lack of self-regulation, there's this incredible stimulation that
Right.
real life, it's kind of like eating candy, that is so sweet, and sugar begets sugar. You eat sugar, you want more sugar. That is what dopamine does in the brain, and I think that's what these electronics do.
Right. And camp, it always has been, like, even before this moment, but never more than this moment. Kids participate, right, in real time, in real life, in reciprocal relationships and moments.
Yeah.
So they generate a similar kind of, like, dopamine response, but in a way that serves them better in
Oh, it's
life, right?
relational.
Because it's
Absolutely.
relational, right?
Yeah.
So the idea really being that in childhood, when we are creating the blueprint of how we navigate, our relationships or the social world, right, in the future. And I think that's the secret, right? Is one of my really close friends, gets really upset when people say to her, you send your kid to full season sleepaway camp. Like, do you not like your kid? Like, why would you give that up? And
Right.
she's like, Lauren, like, give me the words. And I'm like,
Right.
well, you know what you're giving your child. Like, you can't, like, don't justify yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Like, they're living in the dark with what camp actually does for our kids, right? Is
Right.
that you, by sending your child to camp, any camp, not just IHC, but that social space without adults, is creating this blueprint for how they then navigate the social worlds moving forward, right? So,
Absolutely.
that's why we are so committed at IHC to making that a positive experience, right? Because that's the blueprint, like that they feel good about their interactions, their accomplishments. They feel good about their conflict, resolution, right? Is we all have tough moments socially,
Right.
but can you navigate those with the help of adults? Obviously, when you're young, can you conquer it and can you move on? And it creates the feel good hormone, right? It creates like the same response, but in a more helpful way, right? So, it's interesting. Like people have said to me, like, what do you expect, the kids to be like when they show up to camp this summer? Are they going to be able to transition in as quickly as normal? Are they going to need a lot more additional support? And so on. So, what are your thoughts on that? Like, I certainly know what I have been communicating, but what are your thoughts on, okay, so you have children that have been home for so long, they've been on electronics, they're actually coping. They may not be thriving. There is a difference, but they're coping.
Yeah.
We're sending them to camp, which feels like we're going from 0 to 60. How do you feel these kids are going to land at camp? Again, thinking more about, the kind of elementary, maybe middle school age group.
So I want to go back to your, camp mother who called you and said, what do I say to this other mother who, don't I love my kids? And my response to that is not only do I like my kids, I love my kids. And that's why I give them this gift, because it is a gift. I think that camp is going to really be a way to psychologically and emotionally help kids reset, right?
Right.
They haven't been in, and that's the way I would say it, they haven't been in social situations. And if you want to do the brain chemistry, what we're talking about is games really hype up the dopamine system. That's that's the addictive system. What relationships at camp do is they ramp up the oxytocin. That is the connectivity, right? That kids feel like they belong. They have friends who have their back. They have friends who support them, who know what they're going through. They mirror each other. They support each other. I think first of all, I think you are going to have a range of reactions on the part of kids. Some kids are going to be so excited and so exuberant, to be free and to be in a place that they perceive as safe, right? Where they can be with their friends and run around, probably for the first time, by then, in more than 16 months. I think you're going to have kids who are going to be really exuberant. I think you may have few kids who are almost overstimulated by it all. They're so excited to be with their friends that they may be a little silly, or they may be, they may not know when to stop, or, and it'll take a week maybe to kind of adjust. And then you'll have other kids who might be a little bit more apprehensive, a little bit more fearful, worried about like disconnecting from their parents. But as you and I both know, because we've seen it, they too will adjust, right? It's basically you're immersing kids in this community of support and wellness, and where it's really child focused. And I think you talk about that sort of late elementary school, middle school year, that's when kids are naturally, sort of departing or leaving or just, sort of separating from their parents anyway, being part of clubs in school, being part of, say, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, all of that sort of naturally occurs at around 8, 9, 10. Perfect age for kids to go to camp and be part of a bunk and think together and compromise and cooperate and, talk about, figure out their conflicts with each other with the support of caring adults. One of the things that I always say to camp counselors, and I'd like to say this to parents, is where else, because this is another element of camp and what you do so beautifully at IHC, where else do kids who are 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 get to hang out with really appropriate, interesting adults who are 19, 20, 21? Where do they get to do that? Camp. It's the only place I can think of, right? And where they look up to those, by the way, camp counselors, we know, can get kids to do things their parents can't get them to do, right? To
100%.
listen, yeah, to try a new food, to try a new sport or a new activity, to make a new friend, to, reach out. We have kids who come to camp who are introverts and who
Mhm,
learn how to become comfortable in an extroverted world
mhm,
with the
mhm.
support of counselors who are just like them, right?
Yep,
So
yep, yep.
I
Mhm,
really think, the word that you may be looking for is, and I don't think this is an overstatement, camp is going to be like an elixir, right?
okay.
It is a way that we are going to help kids reset themselves emotionally and psychologically. And by the way, if kids don't have a chance to do that first,
Mhm.
they're going to suffer academically later, right?
Oh,
I think,
100%.
yeah, I mean, and I'm going to get on my soapbox right now, but I get a little nervous. I understand people's concerns about, learning loss. I get it. And that,
Mhm,
the lost
mhm,
year of learning or academic learning. And I think it's important. Of course, it's important.
mhm,
And I know kids. And I know that kids are able to
mhm,
concentrate
mhm,
better. They're able
mhm,
to do deep thinking much better. They're able to be creative better when they have been psychologically and emotionally grounded. And if we
mhm,
don't do that first,
mhm.
we're going to perpetuate this learning loss.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Um, so, I mean, it sounds to me like you really feel that camp is going to afford children almost some kind of recovery.
Absolutely. I
I
don't
think
think
you
that's,
use,
yeah,
yeah, I think you used the word reset, but in some ways, like with everything else that you were saying, I was saying it's almost like a recovery. And
right,
of course, you know that I am also an advocate for decompressing from the academic side of things. That academically, and I'm very proud of my academic achievements. I was a very late bloomer, but I had parents who were educators who just let me play, and be social. I was a social, person in our house, and I am such a believer that kids need that space to decompress. And there's also a lot of studies to show, and this is different if your child has a learning challenge or learning difference. One of my sons has a learning difference, and he has ongoing tutoring, because that's important for him to continue with his gains. But, for kids who are meeting their milestones academically and typically, that period off, actually there's studies that show they might have a little bit of learning loss, but the gains that they then make towards the end of the first semester surpass those of the kids who continue with some form of academic tutoring or whatever throughout the summer. So it's been evidenced, right? So what would you say though to a parent? And I have not forgotten about the adolescents. I do want to get back to them in one second, but what would you say to the parent who is saying, but quarantine has really suited our family? Like, we've had more family time. It's been amazing. Quarantine suits my child. Like, they are a homebody. They're very connected to us. Like, they love that we're home. You know, they're comfortable in this little bubble of the family,
right.
which also, I have one of those too. So what would you say to that family who's saying, is camp necessary? Like, is camp, if they're so happy like this, I think I'm making the right choice, but
Right. Well,
what's your advice or thoughts, I guess,
first of all, I want to acknowledge that I think there are a lot of families who have discovered family time, and I think that's one of the great silver linings of the
hmm
pandemic. Kids
hmm
people are, playing board games more. They're talking with each other. They watch TV
hmm
together. I think that's been terrific,
hmm
and I don't think any of that is going to be taken away. When kids go off to camp. I guess
hmm
my answer to a parent who would say, does my child really need camp, is no, unless you want them to live in the world. But if you're
right,
willing to keep them in that bubble of your
right,
family, right through their 30s and 40s and 50s, then fine. Don't,
right,
but that's not
right,
the world. And that's not
right.
life. And I think as the world opens, kids, and I like what you said, it is going to be like recovery. I think
hmm
normally camp is an enrichment experience for kids, right? It's a deep enrichment experience for kids. I think this year it's going to be a recovery experience for kids. I think
hmm
that's kind of what you're getting at. And
Hmm.
I think in the whole country, frankly, we have uh, underestimated the impact, and we've undervalued, what that enrichment does for kids. We have to think
Hmm.
about kids as whole kids, not just
Hmm.
academic
Hmm.
robots, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
think that what I would say to a family about the fact that they've had a very comfortable, wonderful kind of family experience is that's wonderful, that's great,
Hmm.
and that isn't lost when your kid goes off to camp. They keep all of that. That's all
Hmm.
inside,
Hmm.
and what you're giving them is the keys to how to be in the world and be in the world as successfully as they have been in your family.
Right. And I talk a lot to parents because one of the, most common things that I'll hear, particularly from a first year parent, is, they're so attached to us that I'm worried, about sending them to camp.
Yeah,
And I always, remind them, or sometimes at the beginning, it's educate them that, look, a child that has a very strong, secure attachment to a caregiver is a perfect candidate for sleepaway camp, because
absolutely.
what those children do is they transfer the attachment really quickly. Is that a
Perfect.
child that has got secure, strong attachment is
Right.
looking to fill that void in camp.
That's right.
So they actually, it goes against what you would perhaps think, but obviously, as clinicians, we know that no, actually, the opposite is true. Um, but that's really helpful. So
Yeah, I
just.
like. I wanted to say something about what you just said, Lauren, because I think it's
Mhm.
very, very insightful. I think what parents miss is when they say, "Oh, my kids are so attached to me," they think about that attachment as a personal thing. What they fail
Mhm.
to realize, and I think it's what you're really
Mhm.
articulating so well, is that attachment is a capacity, right? If your
Yeah.
child has a really healthy, strong attachment to you, what you're not getting is that's an internal. They built this internal capacity for attaching.
Right.
And I love when you say it transfers to camp. Absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think parents, and by the way, I think it's a relief to parents also because,
Yeah.
do they really want that kid to be attached to them when they're in their teens and their 20s and their 30s? Of course, but also to be in the world.
Exactly. And I think it's also comforting to a lot of parents where both parents work or have a really big job. And then there's a caregiver at home that could be a grandparent or a nanny or an au pair. That if your child is attaching to that caregiver, that is a win, right? Because they're developing secure attachment style, which, by the way, as you and I both know, is really what dictates the kind of social well-being of life in a
That's right.
way, right? It's how you then form attachments to
Yeah.
close friends, to romantic partners, to your own children and beyond. So I think it's so comforting to know that if your child has a secure attachment style, they transfer that to another caregiver. But, obviously, I also, as the recipient, and Joel and Maddie and all of our team, we have a very top heavy team, that we've made the decision to invest in a really high quality, large leadership team, because my point has always been I want skilled people and enough of them to be ready to accept that attachment and reciprocate it, right? Is that I think is the secret sauce of IHC, is that we are ready to receive these children. So yes, they are ready to transition that attachment, even though they don't know they are, but we are ready to receive it. And when that caregiver is there to receive that, kids thrive in camp. They
Mhm.
may not be the most social child in camp, they may have their challenges, but they feel secure. And then we work behind the scenes to do the rest to make them successful in the social
Right.
realm or whatever. Um, so let's just talk about our teenagers, because obviously they're online as well. And a lot of our teenagers aren't in school. So they prioritize the little ones getting back, which I do understand. But I've also talked to parents about the fact that my heart really does break for are teenagers. Like, and I think it's hit them really hard. They're in a social period of life, and that has been taken from them. There's also been milestones. So for many of our campers, special birthdays or a bar bat mitzvah, family members that maybe were supposed to get married, like, they were in this phase of life where the social realm, their friends and whatever is everything, right? And that's been taken away. So I think part two, my big fear is the online applications that they enjoy promote comparison. And I'm worried about a prolonged period of time with them looking at things that naturally make them compare themselves to those things. And I believe that camp is connection without comparison. And I can never communicate strongly enough how important that is. It used to be just for young women. It is now also for young men. Can you talk a little bit about, what the long-term effect of that could be for this age group that are just so vulnerable right now?
Yeah, so I only have about 100 ideas as you were talking. I want to say that I think social media has increased the tendency for teenagers to look over their shoulder and compare themselves to others. And even though they know that everything they see on social media has been sort of hyped or edited or whatever, comparison is the thief of joy. Right. As soon as we compare ourselves, we feel deficient, or we feel that there's no joy in that. And, to talk specifically about teenagers, I think there are three things happening with teens. And by the way, the Kaiser Foundation out on the West Coast and even the CDC have done studies and surveys. And, we see that the level of depression and anxiety in teenagers in the last year has increased by over 40%. So there are three things. One is what you said, that teenagers are naturally social. This is their time to really connect with their friends deeply, to go off from their parents, to sleep overnight at their friends' houses, to go on vacations with their friends and their friends' families, and all of that stopped. And not only have they lost the connection, the relationships, they've lost the opportunity for mastery outside of the family. Meaning, if I have a sport, I can't play it anymore. I can't compete. I can't play basketball. I can't play soccer, right? I can't go on the crew team. I was looking forward to trying out a new sport and I can't do it. We're not having practices. Or if we do, we don't have real games. So I think there's also the loss of all of those markers, all of those milestones, which to me is the opportunity for teenagers to experience mastery outside of the home. And then the third one, which is a big one for teenagers, is autonomy, right? Here they are. Right. This is the opportunity in their life to begin to feel autonomous, like they have a separate sense of themselves, right? It's also tied to, obviously, to their developing identity of who are they and how am I different from my mom or dad? How am I me and not just my mom or my dad, right? Or how am I different from my sibs? And the way they experience that is with their friends. They go off and do things. They feel accomplished. I did it myself. And so those three things, relationship, mastery, and autonomy, I think, by the way, those are the primary colors of psychological health right there. Teenagers have not been able to experience any of those. And I think they've been hit harder than younger kids, particularly because of the autonomy piece, right? They have been cooped up. They haven't been able to go out, and they've even regressed. And I think teens need camp even more than anyone else, because I think they experience all three of those things at camp. They have those deep relationships. They have the opportunity to experience mastery away from their family. And then at the end of it all say, I did it myself, which is really autonomy.
Right.
And so that's it in a nutshell. The teenagers I see, Lauren, in my practice are suffering more than the younger kids, because they feel that cooped up and the frustration of not being able to strike out on their own, basically.
Right. No, absolutely. And, I hear a lot, the term little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems, which I don't fully agree with,
I
but
agree. Yeah, yeah. It's a
I
simplification. Yeah,
yeah, I understand what people are saying, right? That if you, particularly in relation to camp, if you have a
sure.
nervous 8-year-old, it is easier to get them to camp and to navigate that than if you have a nervous 15-year-old. That is very tough. And I do want to acknowledge that for any families that are watching that have teenagers that are nervous, because that's a real thing.
Yes.
And that's difficult to navigate. And I think also, you absolutely want to do right. I mean, we always want to do right by our kids, but when our kids are little, there's room for recovery, right? Whereas when they're getting older, they, I think we feel more vulnerable as parents. So, for the camper that is feeling very anxious, maybe a little bit depressed, maybe a little bit of a combination of both, just encouragement that I listen, if anybody needs to be home and take care of their emotional and psychological well-being, I will support that. But at the same time, encouraging them and their parents that recovery can be hard, right? And you have to put yourself in the arena, right? And that you're not, by this point at IHC, like, you've been with us for many years. And I feel my vulnerability because I feel like I lose my connection to the kids. I have a really strong connection with the kids on lake camp. I want a strong connection with them on hill camp, but they're at a period of time where they are kind of like, yeah, we're good. We don't need you to visit us every night. And it's almost, I'm sure, the same as what parents are experiencing with them at
Absolutely.
home. But
Sure.
then they come back to me, right? Tribe West and particular CITs, they would curl up on my lap again. Maybe not quite, but you know what I'm saying? Like, they come back to me.
Yeah.
So just to kind of remind families and campers, I give their campers my cell phone number. We talk directly because I want that relationship with them. Is you're not coming to an unfamiliar place. It feels unfamiliar because we've been out so long, but your anxiety is about the experience that you've lived over the last 12 to 14 months.
Right.
Camp is your home, right? And we are ready to receive you and help you heal. And that takes a lot of guts, right? And confidence to put yourself in that arena. But if you can get yourself there, you will be in a very therapeutic space, even though it's not a therapeutic space. It's a therapeutic space by default, as opposed to being geared to be a therapeutic space. It just is.
Yeah.
Do you have anything kind of to comment or reassuring words for, those families and those
Sure.
campers?
Yeah. So first of all, one of the things that I think parents can say to their kids and should be saying to their kids is, look, nothing about this pandemic is normal, right? The only thing that's normal about it is the way we feel about it, right? So
Mm-hmm,
normalize a little
mm-hmm,
bit the
mm-hmm,
apprehension, to normalize the anxiety, to normalize that feeling of frustration, right? I think the second thing that parents can say to their kids is, it's not going to be forever, right? There's light
mm-hmm,
at the end of the tunnel.
mm-hmm,
We
mm-hmm.
may have a lot of uncertainty about, like, when is it, that's the other thing about the pandemic. There's not going to be like a finish line. It's not going to be a very specific, we're done. It's
Mm-hmm.
not like
Mm-hmm.
that. It's going to evolve. And so that creates uncertainty. And yet there is light at the end of the tunnel. I
Mm-hmm.
think the third thing, and I think this is kind of what you're getting at, Lauren, is once teenagers get themselves to camp, all of the natural inclinations they have are going to be rekindled. It's natural. It's
Right.
going to be a
Right.
natural process. Their desire for novelty, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a teenager brain thing. They seek novelty. They don't want to be at home. They want
Mm-hmm.
something new.
Mm-hmm.
Camp
Mm-hmm.
is all about new. That's why you have the hill. It's like, we're done with the lake. We need something new. We need our own
Yeah.
space.
Yeah.
And I think it's that seeking novelty. I think it's that seeking those deep connections outside the family. And I think parents need reassurance
Mm-hmm.
that even though you feel like, oh my gosh, I don't have as much control, kids always come back. Like you said, that
Mm-hmm.
original attachment is foundational.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
ever go away, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I love it. I think it's a gift to teenagers that they can go to a place where their natural inclinations will be rekindled, their desire to connect with
Mm-hmm.
kids, be in there, create their own space, create their own world, seek out novelty, and then feel like I did it myself. I have this sense of it's mine, right? That's a
Right.
gift. That's a
Yeah.
gift.
Yeah. Yeah. And I suppose across all ages, that if you were, to say go to camp or stay home, like we have all these things going on, increased anxiety, or, we got into our routine of just being together, that there is no right or wrong here, and we're not here to convince anyone to send their children to camp. Everybody watching this webinar is sending their kids to IHC this summer and, is excited. That's the phone calls that I'm having. But there is truth in that if you stay home, you'll be okay. And you will move on in life, and the next chapter will be ahead of you. And if you come to camp, you will be okay. And in fact, be able to indulge in all the things that were the actual reason your parents chose us all those years ago. If you're a teenager, or even if you're a first year family whose parents only toured last summer, that camp, what we can accomplish at camp, you will be okay either way. But what you can accomplish at camp, this recovery, is really unique to camp, right? And this is where this webinar is for so many more people than just people who sign their child up to IHC. It's for people who choose to send their children to a social experience, any camp, however length of time, a sports camp, an arts camp, like whatever it is, it's universal, isn't it? That what you get in those days, weeks, or months, you cannot replicate anywhere else. So for our families who are sending their children away for 7 weeks, just to remind yourselves of your original why, even though there is a ton of noise, right, with the pandemic. And I do think that, IHC families don't need to feel convinced about Joel and I putting in place the protocols and procedures that we will. I think, again, that's why they chose the camp. But just when it comes to the kind of emotional piece and the well-being piece and all of that, is like, go back to the beginning, right? And I would also say that for children that I have known over the years, and remember that my first generation of campers are now getting married and having babies. So I've been doing this now for some time. Joel's original campers' kids are at camp, right? So we've been doing this for a long time. That since the beginning of time, there have been children that have had severe, reservations about the sleepaway experience for a whole myriad of reasons, some of which are related to a similar situation that we're in now, because we've been through viruses in the past, not quite like this, but also family loss, changes in family dynamic, illness that child has experienced themselves, But what is so interesting is that any ailment that a parent tells me about before camp, we see less
Of course.
during camp.
Sure.
And that's not just about, diagnosable things. That's about kids have a better, more expansive palate at camp. They eat more foods that they eat at home. They sleep better, even though they don't sleep at home. They stay in their own bed, even though they don't at home, right? The parents say to me, I don't think he's going to go to the bathroom. They go to the bathroom at camp, the out with, the more kind of, worrisome things as a parent, the little things tend to really not present in the same way as they do in regular life. And I think that also evidences quite beautifully the kind of freeness that children feel at camp, that we are supposed to be sent outside to go play. And we don't do that as much with our kids anymore. But look, when we do that, all of these things seem to somewhat resolve themselves, which is incredible.
You're right. I think it's a sense of freedom, but also a sense of ownership. It's like, this is my place too. Yeah. I have a little story I want to tell you along that line. I have a young fellow I see, he's now 15. and he has what he calls his quote unquote superstitions, which are
Mhm.
his rituals at night before he goes to bed. He has pretty severe OCD. And so he has to go through these, very sort of ritualistic sequences of behaviors before he can
Mhm.
feel safe to go to sleep, right?
Mhm.
When he goes to camp, he doesn't do any of that. None of it.
Mhm.
It's all gone.
Mhm.
And his
Mhm.
parents were like, wait, what? And it's
Mhm.
like exactly what you say. Whatever it is that kids manifest at home that is dysfunctional or, they struggle with, always manifest less at camp.
Mhm.
And I think it's because of the rich buffet that you offer kids, and they partake of that buffet in, as they can in their own way, to their own ability.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
you let them do it. Nobody's
Mhm.
forced to do it more than they're
Mhm.
comfortable to do. They're encouraged, they're
Right.
supported. And I think that's where that sense of freedom and ownership comes from, and autonomy, which is so
Right.
important. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then that together in summer 2021, with all the restrictions that have been on our kids' lives, the social distancing, the mask wearing all day in school if they're in school, the not being able to have their large group gatherings, I'm hearing kids are craving normalcy.
That's right.
So,
Yeah.
camp, I do feel any camp again, um,
Right.
affords children an opportunity to exist in a way that feels so normal. Like, the CDC guidance has come a long way, that kids don't need to wear masks all the time at camp. Like, it's not necessary,
That's right.
that it's going to feel so normal. Now, of course, we're going to be sensible, I mean, lots of people have worked extremely hard collaboratively to make sure that we all know how to open camp safely this summer. But, you know, we will be sensible, but it will feel very normal. 90% of what camps are doing to keep kids safe and healthy this summer is behind the scenes. The
That's
kids won't even know, right? And
right.
then
Yeah.
the 10% will feel so minuscule in comparison to what they have been experiencing in their lives that
Right.
they're going to be like, this is it. This is all we have to do. Like, I can just be a kid. Like, I think that in itself is going to be create such a high for children
Sure.
that and there really is no other space at the moment available to our kids that can accomplish that.
It's safer in so many ways. You
Hmm.
guys are experts at, putting kids in, risky situations like archery or swimming or whatever it is,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
making it totally safe. And
Hmm.
so you're already expert at knowing how to create safe spaces.
Hmm.
If I, were to put kids of my own somewhere, it would be camp, because it's like,
Hmm.
I know
Hmm.
you are the people who know how to do this, right? Look,
Hmm.
if I had one thing that I could get across to Congress and to the president, it would be, how do we make it possible to send every single kid in the country to camp this summer?
Hmm. Hmm.
That's what I would, because I would be such a
Hmm.
proponent of that, because I think kids need that emotional and psychological reset, which is what they're going to get. And you're right. Most of them are going to be exuberant. They're going to be, wait, what? We can just run around? They're going to be
Hmm.
so relieved and so excited. To be honest with you, I think 2021 is going to be probably one of the most special camp seasons you're going to have,
Great.
because kids are going to appreciate it and savor it and see it as special more than they ever have.
Hmm.
It's I remember that old Joni Mitchell line, it always the way it seems to go, that you don't know what you've got till it's lost.
Hmm.
And kids have lost their innocence. Here we are saying there's this thing you can't see. It's in the air. It might kill you or your grandparents. So
Hmm.
you got to wear this mask. And by the way, just relax. Like,
Hmm.
that ain't going to happen, right? So
Hmm.
kids have
Hmm.
lost their innocence. And I think being able to go back to camp and experience, as you say, Lauren, that normalcy, just like,
Hmm.
oh, we can be kids, is going to be
Hmm.
such
Hmm.
relief, such
Hmm.
relief. Look, I think there are two emotions that this pandemic has really created for a lot of families and a lot of kids, even though, as you
Hmm.
say, a lot of families have done well.
Hmm.
One is helplessness, right?
Hmm.
There's
Hmm.
nothing we can do about this virus. It is what it is. We have to, it runs the game. We don't.
Hmm.
So there's this feeling of pervasive helplessness, and
Mhm.
I think loneliness. And those are the two most difficult emotions for human beings to tolerate. And when kids
Absolutely.
come, yeah, and when kids come back to camp, they're going to feel much less helpless and certainly not alone.
Exactly. No, that's
Oh,
extremely helpful. So, and kind of wrapping this up, you know that I could go on and talk to you for hours.
we could go on for a few days, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we're both passionate about camp in any given year, but none more so than now. And I agree with you that, we've been advocating for years that camp should not be a luxury.
Right,
Camp should be a necessity that every child has access to,
right.
which is why we're all passionate about, the charities that we support. Um, but just to close, let's just talk real quickly about parents. And we have gone through our own journey of loss and a
Right.
fear and all of those things. And that in this moment, more than ever before, it's going to be a challenge to separate ourselves
Right.
from what we are projecting onto our children.
Right.
That I've spoken to parents that I have known for a decade, that have, older kids now coming through, but they're the older child to me is their third child that's come through camp.
Right.
You know, there is a piece again of letting go,
Sure.
right? So
Yeah.
can you talk just a little bit of advice for those parents that, because we also know, and I hold myself in this category too, I'm a buttoned up mom. I know where my kids are. I know what they're doing. Like, I mean, my oldest is 11. Come on. Like, I'm not really prying
Sure.
yet, but
Sure.
like, I'm a buttoned up mom. And, I'm not a helicopter parent. I think you know that. Like, I believe in failure, and I think that that's where you grow. But I know what my kids are doing and know who they're talking to. We're not doing sleepovers right now. Like, we're one of the few that are still not. Like, whatever. My point being, like, how do we help? What can you, as the expert, share with parents that actually need to just let go a little bit and trust? Like, how could you speak to them?
So first of all, I want to acknowledge that the feeling parents have about their anxiety, their trepidation about letting go is simply, we have to honor that. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's your love for your child. That's
Mm-hmm.
terrific. That will never go away,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to honor that. So this is not about trampling that or
Mm-hmm.
you know um, you know devaluing that. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's to say yes, that is. Isn't it a beautiful thing that you love your kids so much? And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things we teach our kids is that what they feel and what they do are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
That you can feel something and behave quite differently, and
Mm-hmm.
that's a measure of maturity. That's what growing up is all about. And so we
Mm-hmm.
have to practice that ourselves as
Mm-hmm.
parents. Like, kids are like little tympanic membranes. It's not what we say that they learn, it's what we do. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that it is natural to feel some trepidation. It's natural to feel some anxiety about letting go. And when we manage that, we're actually modeling for kids what we're trying to teach them, which is what you feel and what you do are two different things. And here's the third thing. What we have found out from some really, really great research, which is a little bit surprising in a way, is that one of the things that helps kids lead a healthy life is when they see and actually trust and experience that their parents have a full life separate from them that has nothing to do with them as kids. In other words, kids need to see their parents living their own lives, right? Going out to dinner, having dates with each other, having date night, having their full life separate from the kids. Because if the kids are at the center of their parents' happiness, that's too much of a burden for kids.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
then it's like, wait a minute, why would I want to grow up? If my parents aren't happy without me, then why would I want to grow up and be an adult?
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
think what parents need to understand is, yes, this is an act of trust. It's totally an act of trust. And their kids need to see that act of trust. It's
Mhm.
like, oh, mom, dad thinks the world really is okay for me to go out. They really do trust they've
Mhm.
equipped
Mhm.
me with what I need,
Mhm.
and they're willing to let me go and do it on my own, you know?
Mhm.
And I think
Mhm.
that's a huge, huge learning experience for
Yeah.
kids.
And if, as a parent, you don't feel that, you shouldn't send them to camp. You
Right.
know, that you have to live your truth. And we've said from the beginning that there are no judgments here.
Right.
But kids are savvy and kids
Right.
see
Absolutely.
through
That's,
falsehoods,
that's
even
right.
when we think we are being the best actors ever.
Right.
Um, but if you know in your heart of hearts, you know that, and again, I'm not having these conversations. I see families that I'm talking to are saying, I can't wait to send them to camp. They need to be with you. They need to be there. It's going to be great. But if there's a few that, you know, are feeling that way, you, in your heart of hearts, you know, this is really hard for me, but I know they need to go to camp. That is why I'm
Right.
here. That is
Right.
why Joel is here. Like, this is where you need to tap us in to support you.
That's
And
right.
I believe that when you care for other people's children in parents' absence, that you are serving both parents and both child's emotional well-being. And I just want to remind parents of that, no matter how seasoned a parent you are, you know, that this is a unique moment. And if you need reassurance or support from us, that is ultimately why we're there, you know, why we're here. I view our jobs to be, you know, risk assessors, as you've said, and ultimately to look after somebody else's child, you need to feel that you can do so safely. We risk assess everything. And then I think we're also, you know, we provide connectivity for parents and kids and staff, that our role is to be there for you, and help you navigate that. So, okay, well, Bob, this was so helpful for me, and I'm sure many parents will also find it helpful. Thank you for your expertise.
Sure.
Um, you
Do you
know, we're
mind if I
hoping,
Do you mind if I just throw one more thing in there about what
yeah,
you said?
yeah.
So I think there are some parents, and we haven't said it as explicitly as this, who feel a little guilty about sending their kids to camp, right? And I think what you're saying is, you know, you have to live your truth. But I want to add one thing to that, which is
Hmm.
that I would invite parents not to feel guilty, but rather feel grateful that there
Hmm.
is such a resource for their kids, that they can give their kids this
Hmm.
gift. And rather than feel guilty, I want them to also savor the time that they have away from their kids. It doesn't mean you love your kids any less.
Hmm.
You're giving them a gift. So for
Hmm.
parents who feel a little guilty, I would encourage you to feel grateful instead. So to
Hmm.
the mom who said, "Why do you send your kids away
Hmm.
for 7 weeks? Don't you love them?" My answer would be, not only do I love them, right? I really want them to have a leg up. I'm going to give them this gift. And you should check it out yourself, right?
I
So,
know. I
yeah,
know. And for me, some of my most, I think, finest parenting moments or periods have come off the back of time away from my children.
yeah,
You know,
sure.
and again,
Yeah,
my oldest is 11, and I have been fortunate. I have lived in the little kids' little problems, but they were big to me because they were mine. They were my problems.
sure.
Some of my most courageous and valuable and insightful and compassionate um, parenting periods have come off the back of me being away from my children for a period of time.
Good point.
So,
Yeah,
Bob, thank you so much.
sure.
We're
My
hoping to do
pleasure.
one more. We may ask some of our families to put in some questions. You are a qualified clinician, you have a successful practice, you are the person to go to if your child needs, you know, assistance or is thinking about camp as well, and needs a little, you know, bit more guidance. So you're available for our parents to ask questions to, and hopefully we can, you know, get that organized in the not too distant future. But for now, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks, Lauren.
You know, a bit more And so you're